The chest pain hit me like a freight train during the quarterly board meeting. One moment I was reviewing Hartwell Pharmaceuticals' latest earnings report, $240 million in revenue this year alone, and the next, I was clutching my left arm while my vision blurred around the edges of the mahogany conference table. "Call 911, someone shouted, but their voice sounded like it was coming from underwater. 43 years I'd spent building this empire from a small Nashville drugstore into one of Tennessee's most successful pharmaceutical companies. 43 years of 12-hour days, strategic acquisitions, and careful planning. And now, at 72, my heart was apparently ready to call it quits. As the paramedics loaded me onto the stretcher, I caught sight of my family gathered in the hospital waiting room. Helen, my ex-wife, looked genuinely concerned despite our bitter divorce 15 years ago. Anthony, my eldest son, paced nervously by the vending machines, his construction worker's hands fidgeting with his phone as he called his wife. But it was Michael who commanded the room's attention. My youngest son stood near the nurse's station in his perfectly tailored Armani suite, speaking in hushed tones to Dr. Patterson. At 34, Michael had everything I'd hoped for in an heir: Harvard law degree, partnership at Nashville's most prestigious firm, and the kind of sharp intelligence that could navigate both courtrooms and boardrooms with equal skill. "What's the prognosis, doctor?" Michael's voice carried that authoritative tone I'd always admired, while Anthony had chosen manual labor over the family. Business, a decision that still disappointed me, Michael had embraced everything I'd built. He understood the pharmaceutical industry, had connections throughout Tennessee's legal and political circles, and possessed the ruthless business instincts necessary to protect our family's legacy. The irony wasn't lost on me that Helen, whom I'd divorced for her lack of ambition, and Anthony, who'd rejected the corporate world for honest construction work, now seemed more genuinely worried about my condition than my chosen successor. "We need to run more tests," Dr. Patterson explained, "but it appears to be a significant cardiac event." Michael nodded gravely, already pulling out his phone. "I'll need to notify the board, restructure some meetings, ensure continuity of operations." Always thinking ahead. Always planning. That's what I respected about Michael, his ability to see the bigger picture while others got lost in emotional reactions. As they wheeled me toward the cardiac unit, my last conscious thought was surprisingly clear. This medical crisis would reveal everyone's true character. In times of genuine vulnerability, people show who they really are beneath the surface. Helen squeezed my hand as we passed. "We'll be right here, Edward. Fight through this." Anthony jogged alongside the gurney. "Dad, I love you. Whatever happens, I love you." But Michael remained by the nurse's station, smartphone pressed to his ear, already managing the business implications of my potential incapacitation. "Yes, I understand the quarterly projections need review," he was saying. "If my father's condition deteriorates, we'll need contingency plans for corporate governance." The sedative began taking effect as we entered the elevator, but I could still hear Michael's voice echoing down the hallway. "The most important thing is ensuring Hartwell Pharmaceuticals continues operating without disruption." Part of me felt proud that Michael was thinking strategically during such an emotional crisis. The other part wondered why he hadn't once asked if I was going to be okay. As consciousness faded, I found myself thinking, let's see who they really are when they believe I'm not watching. 3 days in intensive care, and I was supposedly unconscious to the world. The doctors said my condition had stabilized, but I remained in what they called a medically induced coma, while my body recovered from the massive heart attack. What they didn't know was that I'd been awake for the past 18 hours, listening to every conversation around my bedside. The first revelation came during visiting hours when Michael arrived with his leather briefcase and that familiar calculating expression. He pulled up a chair close to my bed, glanced around to ensure we were alone, then began speaking in a tone I'd never heard from him before. "Well, Dad, this changes everything, doesn't it?" His voice carried none of the respectful deference he'd always shown me. Instead, there was something cold, almost predatory in his words. "The doctors think you might never wake up," he continued, opening his briefcase. "Brain activity is minimal," they said, "which means someone needs to step up and protect what you built." I kept my breathing steady, my eyes closed, every muscle relaxed, despite the shock of hearing my son discuss my potential death with such clinical detachment. "I've been thinking about this situation strategically," Michael said, pulling out a stack of legal documents. "Hartwell Pharmaceuticals needs strong leadership, and frankly, neither Helen nor Anthony has what it takes to run a $240 million operation." He stood up, pacing beside my bed like he was arguing a case in court. "Helen's always been more interested in her charity work than actual business operations. And Anthony, please, the man chose construction work over corporate leadership. They're both liabilities, Dad. You know this." What came next made my blood run cold despite the warming blankets. I've been reviewing the insurance policies, the corporate structure, the inheritance provisions. There are opportunities here, ways to ensure the right person maintains control regardless of what happens to you. Michael leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You always taught me that successful people create their own advantages. Well, I found some interesting discrepancies in the company's insurance filings. Discrepancies that could be traced back to Helen's involvement with the employee benefits program. And Anthony's construction company has done work for Hartwell. Facilities, work that wasn't always properly documented. I felt sick listening to my own son fabricate evidence against his family members. With the right legal pressure, the right witnesses, I could demonstrate that they've been misappropriating company resources for years. Insurance fraud, embezzlement, tax evasion, the charges could be quite serious." He sat back down, his tone becoming almost conversational. "Of course, this would only be necessary if they tried to challenge my assumption of corporate leadership. If they accepted the natural order of things, recognize that I'm the only one qualified to continue your legacy, then these unfortunate discoveries might never come to light." Michael checked his expensive Rolex, a Christmas gift I'd given him last year. "I have a meeting with D.A. Richardson tomorrow. We play golf together at Belle Meade Country Club. I think he'd be very interested in protecting Tennessee businesses from internal corruption, especially when it involves healthcare fraud affecting Medicare recipients." The casual way he mentioned corrupting the district attorney, using their friendship to pursue false charges against innocent family members, revealed a sociopathic calculation I'd never suspected. "Don't worry, Dad. I'll make sure your empire survives. I'll make sure the right people are in charge and the wrong people are removed from the equation." He packed up his documents, straightened his tie, and headed toward the door. "Get some rest. Tomorrow, everything changes." After he left, I lay there in genuine shock. My golden son, my chosen heir, my pride and joy. He was planning to frame Helen and Anthony for crimes they'd never committed, all to secure his inheritance while I lay helpless in this hospital bed. The worst part was knowing that with his legal connections, his reputation in Nashville's elite circles, and his intimate knowledge of company operations, he could probably make the charges stick. The arrests happened exactly 1 week after my supposed heart attack. I watched through barely opened eyes as Detective Morrison from the Nashville Metro Police entered my hospital room, speaking quietly with Michael near the window. My son's performance was Oscar-worthy. The concerned heir, reluctantly cooperating with law enforcement to protect his father's legacy. "I discovered these discrepancies while reviewing company files," Michael said, his voice heavy with fake regret. "Believe me, Detective, this isn't easy. These are family members we're talking about." Morrison nodded sympathetically. "Financial crimes within families are always difficult, Mr. Hartwell, but Medicare fraud affects every taxpayer in Tennessee." The fabricated evidence was masterful in its complexity. Michael had spent the past week creating false invoices showing Helen's charity foundation receiving improper payments from Hartwell Pharmaceuticals' employee insurance fund. He'd doctored construction contracts to make it appear Anthony's company had overcharged for facility renovations, with kickbacks hidden through shell corporations. The total misappropriation appears to exceed $2.3 million over 3 years, Michael explained, handing over a thick folder. My father trusted them completely. They exploited his faith in family. I wanted to scream, to sit up and expose my son's lies, but I forced myself to remain still. Something told me this was bigger than I initially realized, that intervening now would only allow Michael to refine his approach. Detective Morrison studied the documents. This level of sophistication suggests premeditation. We're looking at federal charges here: Medicare fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion. Whatever's necessary to protect other businesses from this kind of internal corruption, Michael replied. My father built Hartwell Pharmaceuticals on integrity. I won't let anyone tarnish that legacy, even family. The arrests happened simultaneously at 6 a.m. the next morning. Through my hospital room's window, I could see news vans already gathering in the parking lot. Michael had clearly tipped off the media. Nothing sells a narrative like perp walks and morning headlines. Helen called me from the police station, not knowing I could hear every word she left on my voicemail. Edward, I don't understand what's happening. They're saying I stole money from the company insurance fund. They have documents, signatures, bank records. I never saw any of this before. Please, if you can hear this, please help us. Anthony's message came an hour later, his voice breaking. Dad, they arrested me at the construction site in front of my entire crew. My wife is terrified. My kids are asking why Daddy was on the news. I don't even understand what they're accusing me of. I never took anything that wasn't mine. You know me, Dad. You know I'm not capable of this. But the most chilling moment came when Michael visited that afternoon, speaking to my unconscious form with casual satisfaction. The arraignment went perfectly, he reported, settling into his usual chair. No bail, given the flight risk and scale of the alleged fraud. Helen's charity connections actually worked against her. The prosecutor argued she has international contacts who might help her flee the country. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through news coverage. Nashville Business Journal is running it as the lead story. Healthcare heiress accused of Medicare fraud. Anthony's getting less coverage, but the construction angle adds credibility to the systematic nature of the scheme. Michael stood up, straightening his tie with the same methodical precision I'd once admired. District Attorney Richardson called personally to commend my civic responsibility in reporting family corruption. Apparently, this case will be central to his re-election campaign against white-collar crime. He leaned closer to my bed, his voice dropping to that familiar whisper. I've retained Morrison, Blackstone and Associates to handle Hartwell Pharmaceuticals' legal interests during this crisis. They're already preparing guardianship papers, given your incapacitation and the criminal charges against other potential heirs. The legal machinery was moving with terrifying efficiency. In less than 2 weeks, Michael had orchestrated the arrest and imprisonment of 2 innocent family members while positioning himself as the sole legitimate heir to a $240 million empire. Tomorrow, I meet with the board of directors to discuss emergency succession planning. By next week, I'll have full operational control of the company. As he prepared to leave, Michael patted my hand with mock affection. Don't worry, Dad. Justice is being served. The right people are being held accountable, and the right person is taking charge. After he left, I lay in the darkness, horrified by the scope of his betrayal and the precision of his execution. The truth was, I'd been fully conscious for 2 weeks. The morning after my heart attack, when Dr. Patterson thought I was still in a medically induced coma, I'd actually regained awareness but chose to remain silent. Something about the hushed conversations around my bedside, the way people spoke differently when they believed I couldn't hear them, made me curious about what I might learn. I never imagined I'd discover that my favorite son was a sociopathic criminal. The medical equipment made my deception easier than I'd expected. The heart monitor continued showing steady rhythms. The breathing tube had been removed days ago, and my vital signs remained stable enough that nurses only checked on me every few hours. During visiting periods, I simply kept my eyes closed and regulated my breathing while listening to conversations that revealed the true nature of everyone around me. Dr. Patterson had actually cleared me for consciousness 3 days ago, but I'd convinced him during brief private moments to maintain the coma status on my charts. I told him I needed time to process the trauma, to prepare for the overwhelming business decisions that would come with my recovery. What I really needed was time to document Michael's confessions. The small digital recorder I'd requested from my night nurse, supposedly for future voice therapy, had captured every damning conversation. Michael's detailed descriptions of fabricating evidence, his casual discussions of bribing witnesses, his cold analysis of framing Helen and Anthony for crimes they'd never committed. 23 hours of recordings that would destroy him in any courtroom. But the moral weight of my decision was crushing me. While I gathered evidence of Michael's betrayal, 2 innocent people sat in county jail, their reputations ruined, their families devastated. Helen's charity work had been suspended pending investigation. Anthony's construction business was hemorrhaging clients who didn't want to associate with alleged criminals. Every day I maintained this charade. Their suffering continued. Yet I also knew that revealing myself prematurely would allow Michael to adjust his strategy, possibly destroy evidence and potentially escape consequences altogether. He was, after all, one of Nashville's most skilled attorneys. The complexity of his frame-up was genuinely impressive in its thoroughness. He'd created false email trails showing Helen authorizing improper insurance transfers. He'd fabricated construction invoices with Anthony's forged signatures. He'd manufactured bank records showing money flowing through shell companies that existed only on paper. Most disturbing was his network of corrupted officials. District Attorney Richardson wasn't just a golf partner. Michael had been feeding him information about potential political rivals for months, building a relationship based on mutual benefit. Judge Whitfield, who'd denied bail for Helen and Anthony, owed his appointment to legal recommendations Michael had provided to the governor's office. The entire Nashville establishment was compromised, and Michael had been working this system for years, preparing for exactly this moment. During yesterday's visit, he'd revealed the final phase of his plan. "The board meeting went perfectly, Dad," he'd reported with satisfaction. "Emergency succession provisions are now in effect. I have full operational control of Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, with permanent authority pending resolution of the criminal cases against other family members." He'd pulled out a thick legal document, setting it on my bedside table. "I've also prepared updated estate planning documents. Given the criminal charges against Helen and Anthony, it makes sense to revise inheritance provisions. These new papers ensure that convicted felons can't benefit from your legacy, protecting the company from future claims." The cruelest part was that Michael genuinely believed he was unconscious, that his confession was safe because his father couldn't hear him. "You always taught me that successful people make difficult decisions," he'd continued. "Sometimes you have to sacrifice individuals for the greater good. Helen and Anthony were never going to be capable of running this empire anyway. This way, they're removed from the equation, and the company stays strong." He'd leaned closer, his voice taking on an almost affectionate tone. "I'm doing this for you, Dad. I'm protecting everything you built. When you wake up, if you wake up, you'll see that I've solved all the family problems you were too sentimental to address yourself." That night, alone with my thoughts and recordings, I'd made my final decision. The trial was scheduled for next week. Helen and Anthony's court-appointed attorneys were overwhelmed by the fabricated evidence, unable to mount an effective defense against Michael's sophisticated legal strategy. But I had something Michael didn't know about. A surprise witness who'd heard every confession, recorded every detail, and was about to reveal himself at the most dramatic possible moment. It was time to wake up. Michael's transformation from grieving son to corporate dictator happened with breathtaking speed. Within 3 weeks of my supposed coma, he'd moved into the executive suite at Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, redecorated my office with his Harvard diplomas and legal awards, and begun systematically restructuring 43 years of careful business relationships. I watched him through the hospital window as news crews captured his first press conference as acting CEO, standing on the steps of our downtown Nashville headquarters. He presented himself as the reluctant heir forced to assume leadership during family crisis. "My father built this company on principles of integrity and accountability," he declared to the cameras, his voice carrying that practiced attorney's authority. "Recent discoveries of internal corruption have been deeply painful for our family, but Hartwell Pharmaceuticals will emerge stronger under new leadership committed to transparency." The reporters ate it up. Nashville Business Journal ran a full feature. "Young CEO saves family empire from internal fraud." Tennessee Healthcare. Weekly praised his courageous decision to prioritize company integrity over family loyalty. But his private conversations, captured during daily hospital visits, revealed the true scope of his ambitions. "The board voted unanimously to expand my authority yesterday," he reported during one afternoon visit, settling into his usual chair beside my bed. "Full operational control, emergency acquisition powers, and authority to restructure executive compensation." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through corporate documents with obvious satisfaction. "I've also initiated discussions with Meridian Pharmaceuticals about a potential merger. They're offering $340 million for combined operations, which would represent a 40% premium over current valuation." My blood pressure monitor actually spiked at that revelation, though Michael didn't notice the subtle change in readings. 43 years building Hartwell Pharmaceuticals into Tennessee's premier independent pharmaceutical company, and my son was planning to sell it within a month of assuming control. The Meridian deal would eliminate hundreds of Nashville jobs, consolidate operations in Atlanta, and destroy the regional healthcare network I'd spent decades developing. Of course, the criminal charges against Helen and Anthony actually strengthen our negotiating position, Michael continued with clinical detachment. Meridian's lawyers are confident that convicted felons will have no legal standing to challenge the sale, eliminating potential inheritance complications. He leaned back, his expression taking on that familiar calculating look. "I've retained Morrison, Blackstone and Associates to handle the transition. They're also managing my personal legal interests, ensuring that all inheritance provisions are properly structured before any changes in your condition." The euphemism was chilling. Michael was actively planning for my death while positioning himself to profit from it. "Dr. Patterson says your brain activity remains minimal," he noted, checking his Rolex. "Frankly, prolonged life support seems cruel at this point. I've been researching Tennessee's end-of-life legislation, consulting with medical ethicists about quality of life considerations. I had to concentrate on keeping my breathing steady as my son discussed terminating my life support. Your healthcare directive is somewhat ambiguous about extraordinary measures," he continued. "But as your legal proxy and closest family member not facing criminal charges, I have significant authority over medical decisions." The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. Michael planned to sell the company, eliminate the inheritance rights of Helen and Anthony through their criminal convictions, then end my life support to finalize his control over the estate. "Judge Whitfield has been very understanding about the unusual circumstances," Michael noted. "He's expedited the inheritance proceedings, recognizing that prolonged uncertainty serves no one's interests." He stood up, straightening his expensive suit with that methodical precision I'd once found admirable. "Tomorrow I'm meeting with Meridian's executive team to finalize preliminary agreements. The sale should close within 60 days, assuming no unexpected complications." Michael moved closer to my bed, his voice dropping to that familiar whisper. "You'd be proud of how I'm handling this crisis, Dad. I'm making the difficult decisions you always taught me to make. Sometimes you have to sacrifice sentiment for strategy." He patted my hand with mock affection. "Don't worry about Helen and Anthony. They'll be well taken care of in prison. And don't worry about the company. I'm ensuring it survives and prospers, even if that means making changes you might not initially understand." After he left, I lay there processing the full scope of his betrayal. Not only was he framing innocent family members and planning my murder, but he was also destroying the life's work that had defined my entire adult existence. The digital recorder hidden beneath my pillow had captured every word, every casual discussion of murder and corporate theft. But I also realized that time was running out. Michael's timeline was accelerating, and once the Meridian sale closed and my life support ended, there would be no opportunity for justice. The trial was scheduled to begin in 4 days. Helen and Anthony's fate would be decided by a corrupted legal system, while Michael finalized his plans to profit from their imprisonment and my death. It was almost time for Edward Hartwell to make his most important court appearance. The Davidson County Jail visiting room smelled like industrial disinfectant and despair. Through the security cameras I'd arranged to monitor, I watched Helen and Anthony during their weekly legal consultations, their faces gaunt from weeks of institutional food and sleepless nights on narrow cots. Their court-appointed attorneys, overwhelmed public defenders juggling dozens of cases, barely had time to review the massive evidence files Michael had assembled. The sophistication of his fabricated documents required forensic accounting expertise that Tennessee's underfunded legal aid system simply couldn't provide. Helen's lawyer, a recent law school graduate named Sarah Chen, struggled through boxes of false invoices during their 30-minute consultation. "Mrs. Hartwell, I have to be honest," Chen explained, her voice heavy with defeat. "The prosecution has email records showing your electronic signature on transfers totaling $1.2 million from the Employee Insurance Fund to your charity foundation. Never signed any such transfers," Helen insisted, her voice hoarse from weeks of stress. "I barely understand how electronic signatures work. I always handled charity paperwork through handwritten checks and physical documents." But Chen shook her head helplessly. "The digital trail is incredibly detailed. They have timestamps, IP addresses, even security footage of you entering the Hartwell offices on the dates these transfers were allegedly authorized. What Chen didn't know was that Michael had created those digital signatures using Helen's company computer access, timestamps from her routine charity coordination visits, and security footage that proved nothing except her legitimate presence in family business offices." Anthony's situation was equally hopeless. His attorney, an overworked public defender named Marcus Williams, reviewed construction invoices that appeared to show systematic overcharging and kickback schemes. "The prosecution claims your company submitted false invoices for $800,000 in unnecessary renovations," Williams explained during their consultation. "They have bank records showing payments to shell companies that allegedly funneled money back to your personal accounts." Anthony's calloused hands trembled as he studied the fabricated documents. "Mr. Williams, I've never seen these companies before. Henderson Construction, Nashville Renovation Services, Tennessee Building Solutions. I don't know who they are." "The problem is that the bank records show your signature on the establishment documents," Williams replied, "and the shell companies were dissolved immediately after receiving payments, which suggests deliberate concealment." Michael's attention to detail was genuinely masterful. He'd forged Anthony's signature using samples from legitimate Hartwell construction contracts, created temporary business entities that existed just long enough to process fraudulent transactions, then dissolved them before anyone could investigate their legitimacy. Meanwhile, the media coverage was destroying their reputations throughout Nashville. Helen's charity work, which had provided health care access to thousands of low-income families, was suspended pending criminal resolution. Anthony's construction company had lost every major contract as clients distanced themselves from the alleged fraud scandal. Their families were suffering equally. Helen's daughter from her first marriage had been forced to withdraw from Vanderbilt University due to harassment from classmates who'd seen the news coverage. Anthony's teenage sons faced ridicule at their high school, where teachers whispered about their father's alleged crimes. But the cruelest torture came from their complete inability to understand how such detailed evidence against them had materialized. During one particularly heartbreaking conversation I observed, Helen asked her attorney the question that haunted both defendants. How could someone create such elaborate false evidence? Who would have access to our signatures, our computer systems, our business relationships? Sarah Chen had no answer because the truth was too monstrous to consider. Their own family member had spent months preparing their destruction. The psychological pressure was breaking them down. Helen had lost 20 pounds, her face hollow with stress and confusion. Anthony's construction worker's strength seemed diminished. His shoulders slumped with the weight of accusations he couldn't comprehend or defend against. Their phone calls from jail, which I monitored through legal channels, revealed their growing desperation. "I keep trying to figure out who could have done this to us," Helen told her sister during one conversation. "Someone with intimate knowledge of Hartwell operations, someone who understood our family dynamics, someone who could access our business records and personal information. The only people with that level of access would be Edward or Michael," her sister replied. "But Edward's unconscious, and Michael's the one who reported the crimes to police." Anthony's calls to his wife were equally heartbreaking. "I built that construction business with honest work," he insisted. 20 years of getting up at 5 a.m., treating every client with respect, paying every worker fairly. And now they're saying I'm a thief who stole from my own father's company. His wife's response revealed the broader family devastation. "The bank called about our mortgage. They're concerned about your ability to make payments while facing criminal charges. And the kids are asking when you're coming home." The trial was set to begin in 2 days. Jury selection had already occurred, with 12 Davidson County residents who'd been exposed to weeks of prejudicial media coverage. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Richardson himself, had promised a swift conviction that would send a message about white-collar crime in Tennessee. Michael visited both defendants the day before trial, accompanied by news cameras that captured his painful duty of confronting family members who'd allegedly betrayed his unconscious father's trust. "I hope they understand that this prosecution isn't personal," he told reporters outside the jail. "It's about protecting Tennessee businesses from internal corruption and ensuring that Medicare fraud doesn't harm our most vulnerable citizens." That night, as I lay in my hospital bed reviewing the recordings of Michael's confessions, I realized tomorrow would determine whether justice existed in Nashville's legal system or whether corruption had completely compromised the pursuit of truth. Helen and Anthony would face trial in the morning, defended by overwhelmed attorneys against fabricated evidence that could send them to federal prison for decades, unless their father decided to wake up and tell the real story. The courthouse steps buzzed with media activity as Nashville prepared for what reporters called the trial of the decade. 3 weeks of sensational coverage had transformed a family tragedy into entertainment, with legal analysts debating the case on local television and social media followers choosing sides between the greedy siblings and the heroic son. Michael stood at the center of it all, impeccably dressed in his courtroom finest, fielding questions with practiced ease. "This trial represents everything my father built his company on," he declared to Channel 4 News. "Integrity, accountability, and the courage to pursue justice even when it's personally painful." Behind him, the Davidson County Courthouse looked imposing in the early morning light, its limestone columns and Tennessee state flags creating the perfect backdrop for his performance as the reluctant prosecutor of family corruption. But inside my hospital room, Michael's private conversations revealed a man drunk on his own success. "Everything's falling into place perfectly, Dad," he reported during his evening visit, settling into his usual chair with obvious satisfaction. Jury selection went exactly as planned. 12 middle-class Davidson County residents who've been reading about Medicare fraud for weeks. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through news coverage with the enthusiasm of a movie star reading reviews. Richardson's opening statement is going to be devastating. He's got charts showing the money trail, enlarged photos of forged signatures, even a timeline demonstrating the systematic nature of the scheme. Michael leaned back, his expression taking on that familiar calculating look. The defense attorneys are completely overwhelmed. They've had 3 weeks to prepare for a case I've been building for 6 months. They don't even understand the sophistication of the evidence they're trying to refute. What terrified me most was his complete confidence in the system he'd corrupted. District Attorney Richardson wasn't just prosecuting this case, he was using it as the centerpiece of his re-election campaign. Judge Whitfield had already demonstrated his bias by denying bail and expediting proceedings. The jury had been exposed to weeks of prejudicial media coverage. "I've also finalized the Meridian deal," Michael continued casually. "The sale closes Friday afternoon, pending resolution of inheritance complications. They're paying $340 million for assets that were valued at $240 million just 6 months ago." He checked his expensive Rolex, the same watch I'd given him for Christmas. "Dr. Patterson says your condition continues to deteriorate. Brain activity is minimal, response to stimuli essentially non-existent. He's recommending that we consider end-of-life planning within the next week." The timeline was accelerating exactly as I'd feared. Michael planned to secure criminal convictions against Helen and Anthony tomorrow, finalize the corporate sale on Friday, then terminate my life support over the weekend. By Monday, he'd be the sole heir to a $340 million estate with no living family members capable of challenging his inheritance. "I've retained grief, counselors to help me through the difficult decisions ahead," he said with mock solemnity. "Losing a father while dealing with family betrayal and corporate responsibility, it's almost more than anyone should have to bear." His performance was flawless, the kind of methodical preparation that had made him one of Nashville's most successful attorneys. "Judge Whitfield has been extremely understanding about the unusual circumstances," Michael noted. "He's agreed to expedite inheritance proceedings once the criminal trial concludes. Recognizing that prolonged uncertainty serves no one's interests, he stood up, straightening his suit with that familiar precision. Tomorrow, justice will finally be served. Helen and Anthony will face the consequences of their betrayal, and Hartwell Pharmaceuticals will be protected from future corruption under new leadership." Michael moved closer to my bed, his voice dropping to that intimate whisper I'd grown to hate. "You'd be so proud of how I've handled this crisis, Dad. I've protected everything you built while eliminating the family members who were never worthy of your legacy anyway." He patted my hand with mock affection. "Don't worry about tomorrow. I've thought of everything. Every detail has been planned, every contingency considered. By this time, tomorrow night, our family problems will be permanently resolved." After he left, I lay in the darkness, processing the magnitude of his crime and the precision of his execution. In less than 24 hours, 2 innocent people would face trial for fabricated crimes while their true victimizer watched from the gallery, playing the role of grieving family member seeking justice. But Michael had made one critical error in his planning. He'd assumed his father would remain unconscious forever. The trial was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. Dr. Patterson had agreed to discharge me at 7 a.m. under strict medical supervision, allowing me to appear as a surprise witness for the defense. My attorney, secretly retained through confidential channels, had prepared all necessary documentation to authenticate the recorded confessions. The digital recorder containing 23 hours of Michael's admissions sat hidden beneath my pillow, waiting to destroy the most elaborate criminal conspiracy in Nashville's legal history. Tomorrow, Michael would discover that his unconscious father had been listening to every word, recording every confession, and preparing the most devastating courtroom surprise in Tennessee legal history. It was time to wake up and deliver justice. The Davidson County courtroom was packed to capacity when Judge Whitfield called the morning session to order. Media representatives filled the gallery. Sketch artists positioned themselves for optimal views, and legal observers from across Tennessee had gathered to witness what everyone expected would be a swift conviction. Michael sat in the front row behind the prosecution table, perfectly positioned for cameras to capture his stoic dignity as the grieving son forced to pursue justice against his own family. District Attorney Richardson had delivered a devastating opening statement, methodically presenting the fabricated evidence that painted Helen and Anthony as sophisticated criminals who'd exploited their unconscious father's trust. The defense attorneys, Sarah Chen and Marcus Williams had struggled through their responses, overwhelmed by the complexity of charges they barely understood. Helen and Anthony sat at the defendant's table looking defeated, their faces hollow from weeks of imprisonment and psychological torture. The prosecution calls its first witness, Richardson announced, beginning what everyone expected would be a systematic presentation of Michael's masterfully fabricated case. That's when everything changed, Your Honor, interrupted a voice from the courtroom's rear entrance. The defense requests permission to call a surprise witness. All heads turned as attorney Patricia Morrison, secretly retained through confidential channels, entered the courtroom pushing a wheelchair. The figure seated in it wore a hospital gown beneath a dark suit jacket, oxygen tubes running to a portable tank, but his eyes were completely alert and focused. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Your Honor, Morrison announced clearly, Edward Hartwell wishes to testify on behalf of the defendants. Michael's face went absolutely white. He half rose from his seat, mouth opening in shock before collapsing back into his chair as if he'd been struck by lightning. Objection, Richardson shouted, scrambling to his feet. Mr. Hartwell is in a medically induced coma. This is clearly some kind of fraud or impersonation. Judge Whitfield banged his gavel repeatedly as reporters began shouting questions and camera flashes exploded throughout the gallery. Order. I'll have order in this courtroom. Dr. Patterson, who'd been secretly coordinating with my legal team, stepped forward with medical documentation. Your Honor, Mr. Hartwell regained consciousness 4 days ago. I can provide complete medical records confirming his mental competency and legal capacity to testify. I raised a trembling hand, my voice weak but audible throughout the suddenly silent courtroom. Your Honor, I've been awake for 3 weeks. I've heard every conversation, recorded every confession, and I'm here to tell the truth about who really committed crimes in this case. Michael looked like he was having a heart attack himself. His face had gone from white to gray, sweat beading on his forehead as the full implications of my appearance began sinking in. Your Honor, Patricia Morrison continued, Mr. Hartwell has extensive audio recordings of the actual perpetrator confessing to fabricating all evidence against the defendants. We request immediate dismissal of all charges and the arrest of Michael Hartwell for multiple felonies including evidence tampering, bribery, false imprisonment, and conspiracy. The courtroom exploded again. Helen and Anthony were crying. Sarah Chen was frantically shuffling through papers, and District Attorney Richardson looked like he'd been hit by a truck. Approach the bench, Judge Whitfield commanded. All counsel immediately. During the heated sidebar conference, I watched Michael's complete psychological collapse. 3 weeks of supreme confidence, of certain victory, of believing he'd outsmarted everyone. All shattered in 30 seconds by his supposedly unconscious father's resurrection. When the attorneys returned from their conference, Judge Whitfield's expression was grim. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are dismissed. This court is ordering an immediate recess pending emergency motions. Patricia Morrison helped position my wheelchair facing the gallery, where dozens of cameras captured every word as I began my testimony. For 3 weeks, I listened to my son Michael describe how he fabricated every piece of evidence against Helen and Anthony. He created false invoices, forged signatures, bribed witnesses, and corrupted District Attorney Richardson through their golf partnership. At Belle Meade Country Club, I held up the small digital recorder that had captured Michael's confessions. 23 hours of recordings, including detailed descriptions of his criminal conspiracy to frame innocent family members while stealing their inheritance and planning to end my life support. Michael tried to stand, stumbled, and fell back into his seat as Detective Morrison, the same officer who'd arrested Helen and Anthony, moved toward him with handcuffs. Michael Hartwell, Morrison announced, you're under arrest for evidence tampering, conspiracy, bribery of public officials, and attempted murder. The courtroom erupted in absolute chaos as Michael was handcuffed and led away, his carefully constructed empire of lies collapsing in real time before a packed gallery of witnesses and television cameras. Richardson had fled through a side exit, his political career ending as dramatically as his corruption had been exposed. But the most powerful moment came when Helen and Anthony were officially released from custody, their charges dismissed with prejudice. Through tears of relief and vindication, they approached my wheelchair as their families rushed from the gallery to embrace them. "I'm sorry," I whispered as Helen kissed my forehead. "I'm sorry you had to suffer while I gathered evidence to destroy him completely." "You saved us, Dad," Anthony said, his voice breaking. "You saved us and got justice for everyone he hurt." Outside the courthouse, as media crews captured the dramatic reversal that would dominate headlines across Tennessee, I realized that Michael's greatest mistake had been underestimating the man who'd built a $240 million empire through patience, strategic thinking, and the ability to recognize true character under pressure. He'd forgotten that his father was still alive to judge him. The aftermath of Michael's arrest played out like a controlled demolition of everything he'd built through years of calculated corruption. Within 48 hours, the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation had raided his law office, seizing computers, files, and financial records that revealed a conspiracy far broader than anyone had imagined. The fabricated evidence against Helen and Anthony was just the tip of an iceberg that extended throughout Nashville's legal and political establishment. District Attorney Richardson, who'd fled the courthouse during my testimony, was arrested at Nashville International Airport attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands with $2.3 million in cash and falsified identification documents. His corruption went back 5 years, involving dozens of cases where he'd accepted bribes to prosecute innocent defendants while protecting actual criminals. Richardson's entire career was built on selling justice to the highest bidder. FBI Special Agent Martinez explained during a press conference that drew national media attention. The Hartwell case was simply his most elaborate scheme to date. Judge Whitfield had already been suspended pending federal investigation into his role in denying bail and expediting proceedings. His chambers had yielded evidence of improper communications with Michael, including detailed discussions about ensuring Helen and Anthony remained imprisoned until inheritance documents could be finalized. But Michael's personal downfall was the most spectacular. Collapse of all. His prestigious law firm, Morrison, Blackstone and Associates, had terminated his partnership within hours of his arrest, issuing a public statement distancing themselves from his criminal activities. The Tennessee Bar Association had initiated immediate disbarment proceedings, while federal prosecutors prepared charges that could result in life imprisonment. "The scope of his crimes is truly unprecedented," explained U.S. Attorney Sarah Williams during a televised briefing. "Evidence tampering, bribery, conspiracy, attempted murder, Medicare fraud. The very crimes he falsely accused his family members of committing." The irony wasn't lost on anyone that Michael faced the same charges he'd fabricated against Helen and Anthony, except his crimes were real and thoroughly documented. His personal finances unraveled with equal dramatic flair. The luxurious Belmead mansion he'd purchased with anticipated inheritance money was seized by federal marshals. His expensive cars, art collection, and country club memberships, all purchased through fraudulent loans secured against assets he'd never legally controlled, vanished overnight. Most devastating was the complete destruction of his reputation throughout Nashville's elite social circles. The same country club members who'd admired his legal acumen now refused to acknowledge his existence. Former clients demanded refunds and filed malpractice suits. Social media was flooded with stories from people who'd suspected his character but been intimidated by his connections and reputation. "I always thought there was something cold about Michael Hartwell," commented Margaret Pemberton, a longtime Nashville society figure, during a Channel 4 interview. "He had all the right credentials and connections, but no warmth, no genuine empathy for other people." The Meridian Pharmaceuticals deal, which Michael had nearly finalized to sell my life's work, collapsed immediately upon revelation of the fraud. Meridian's executives issued public statements expressing horror at their unwitting involvement in a criminal conspiracy, while their legal team initiated damage control procedures to protect the company from association with the scandal. "We conducted due Diligence based on representations we believed were truthful, explained Meridian CEO Robert Chen. Had we known the supposed criminal charges against family members were fabricated, we never would have considered acquisition under those terms. Meanwhile, Helen and Anthony's vindication was as complete as Michael's destruction. The media coverage that had once painted them as sophisticated criminals now celebrated their dignity under false accusation and their family's courage in pursuing truth. Despite overwhelming odds, Helen's charity work, which had been suspended during the false prosecution, resumed with unprecedented community support. Donations poured in from across Tennessee as people sought to compensate for the injustice she'd endured. Her organization's mission to provide healthcare access to low-income families resonated even more powerfully after her own experience with corrupted justice. Systems.Anthony's construction business experienced a similar renaissance. Clients who'd fled during the scandal returned with apologetic phone calls and substantial contracts. His reputation for honest work and fair dealing, which had been attacked by fabricated evidence, emerged stronger than ever as the truth revealed his genuine character. The whole experience taught me that integrity isn't just about doing right when people are watching, Anthony told the Nashville Scene during a feature interview. It's about who you really are when everything seems lost and the whole world believes lies about you. The family's legal team, led by Patricia Morrison, had already filed civil lawsuits against Richardson, Whitfield, and Michael seeking damages for false imprisonment, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The settlements were expected to reach tens of millions of dollars, funded by seized assets from the criminal conspiracy. But perhaps the most satisfying consequence was Michael's complete isolation in Davidson County Jail, where he awaited trial in the same facility where Helen and Anthony had suffered during his fabricated prosecution. Unlike his innocent victims, Michael had no family members visiting him, no legal team fighting for his freedom, no community support sustaining his spirits. He'd destroyed every relationship through his betrayal, leaving himself utterly alone to face the consequences of his crimes. Justice, I realized from my hospital bed as I recovered from the genuine medical trauma of recent weeks, sometimes arrives exactly as it should, complete, undeniable, and perfectly balanced. 6 months later, I stood in the executive boardroom of Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, looking out at the Nashville skyline while contemplating the most important decision of my 72 years on Earth. The view hadn't changed, but everything else about my perspective had been transformed by the experience of testing my family's character under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. The company had not only survived the scandal but emerged stronger than ever. Our stock price had actually increased as investors recognized that the criminal conspiracy had been eliminated and honest leadership restored. The attempted sale to Meridian, which would have destroyed hundreds of Tennessee jobs, had been permanently canceled. Instead, we'd expanded operations and hired additional employees throughout Middle Tennessee. Helen sat across from me at the conference table, reviewing quarterly reports with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made her charity work so successful. Her experience with false accusations had given her a profound understanding of corporate accountability and ethical oversight that proved invaluable in business operations. The Medicare compliance audit came back, completely clean, she reported with satisfaction. Federal investigators found no irregularities in our insurance programs, employee benefits, or patient assistance initiatives. Anthony looked up from construction blueprints for our new research facility, his calloused hands pointing to details that demonstrated his commitment to quality and safety. His understanding of building codes, worker protection, and honest contracting had proven essential as we expanded manufacturing capabilities. The new lab facility will be completed 2 months ahead of schedule and 15% under budget, he announced proudly. Every contractor, every supplier, every worker knows they're part of something built on integrity. The contrast with Michael's approach couldn't have been more dramatic. Where he had seen family members as obstacles to eliminate, I now recognized invaluable partners whose character had been proven under the most difficult circumstances. where he had planned to sell the company for quick profit, Helen and Anthony were committed to long-term growth that benefited employees, patients, and the broader Nashville community. "I've been thinking about inheritance planning," I announced, pulling out documents I'd spent weeks preparing with the finest estate attorneys in Tennessee. Not just financial inheritance, but the kind of legacy that really matters. Both Helen and Anthony looked up with interest, though neither showed the greedy calculation that had characterized Michael's every interaction with family business. "Helen, I'm making you Chief Operating Officer of Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, with full authority over daily operations and strategic planning. Your experience managing charitable organizations, combined with what you've learned about justice and accountability, makes you the ideal leader for our next phase of growth." Helen's eyes filled with tears, not of joy for personal gain, but of recognition for the trust I was placing in her abilities. "Anthony, I'm appointing you Director of Corporate Development, with responsibility for all facility construction, vendor relationships, and operational integrity. Your commitment to honest work and fair dealing represents everything this company should stand for." Anthony nodded gravely, understanding the weight of responsibility I was offering him. "As for Michael's inheritance," I continued, referring to documents that legally formalized what everyone already understood, "he forfeited any claim to family assets through his criminal conviction for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and attempted murder. Those inheritance provisions now transfer to Helen and Anthony, who proved their worthiness through adversity." The legal proceedings against Michael had concluded with a plea bargain that resulted in 15 years in federal prison, complete restitution to his victims, and permanent disbarment from legal practice. He would serve his sentence in the same federal facility where many of his falsely accused victims might have ended up if his conspiracy had succeeded. "But the most important inheritance isn't money or corporate control," I continued, looking at both of them with genuine pride. "It's the knowledge that character matters more than appearances, that integrity survives every test, and that family means standing by each other when everything seems lost." Helen reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "You gave us the greatest gift possible, Edward. You proved that truth eventually wins, even when it seems impossible." Anthony smiled, his expression carrying none of the resentment I might have expected after years of being dismissed as the family disappointment. "You taught me that honest work and genuine character are worth more than any inheritance. Even when the whole world believed lies about us, we knew who we really were." The transformation in our family dynamics was complete and irreversible. Where Michael's presence had created competition, manipulation, and calculation, Helen and Anthony brought collaboration, transparency, and mutual support. Where he had seen business as a game to be won through any means necessary, they understood it as a responsibility to employees, patients, and the broader community. "Hartwell Pharmaceuticals will continue for generations," I declared, signing the final inheritance documents that legally formalized what justice had already determined. "But it will be run by people who earned their positions through character, not favoritism." As the sun set over Nashville, painting the conference room in golden light, I realized that Michael's attempt to destroy our family had actually saved it. His test of my character through fake vulnerability had revealed everyone's true nature, including my own capacity for strategic patience and ultimate justice. The empire would survive, stronger and more ethical than ever before. The innocent had been vindicated completely. The guilty faced appropriate consequences for their crimes, and Edward Hartwell had learned the most valuable lesson of his 72 years. True family isn't determined by blood or favoritism, but by who stands with you when everything else falls apart, who maintains integrity under pressure, and who proves worthy of trust through their actions rather than their words. Justice, I discovered, sometimes requires patience, strategy, and the wisdom to recognize genuine character when it's tested by genuine adversity. If you made it through Edward Hartwell's incredible journey of family betrayal, strategic patience, and ultimate justice, You're part of an exclusive group who appreciates stories where character truly matters and truth eventually wins. This kind of deep, satisfying narrative takes hours to craft and research. So, if you enjoyed watching Michael's carefully constructed lies crumble while Helen and Anthony rose from false accusations to rightful leadership, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our premium storytelling content. Your like helps this story reach other people who appreciate tales where patience, integrity, and strategic thinking triumph over manipulation and greed, and honestly, we could all use more stories like that in our lives right now. Drop a comment below telling us what you thought about Edward's decision to stay unconscious while gathering evidence. Whether you saw Michael's true nature coming, or if you have your own family stories about discovering someone's real character under pressure, because your engagement and perspectives make this community stronger and help us create even better content for people who love complex, satisfying narratives that restore faith in justice.